Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Welcome into the RotoWire NFL podcast. I am your host, John McCackney, joined as always by Mario Puig. It is Thursday, March 25th. We are well into free agency, and we're also into full swing of draft season. We got pro day numbers pouring in left and right, a lot of notable players working out at their respective colleges, putting down their times, getting their measurables, all that good stuff. So a ton to get to today. So we're going to get into some pro day, notable stuff, and we're also going to get into some notable free agent signings that have occurred over the last week or so since Mario and I last chatted on here. But Mario, I want to get things started. We got two receivers that I think have drawn the most attention in the NFL draft circles this week for their respective pro days. And both of them, very impressive players, but very polarizing. A lot of sort of there's elements where people just want to crap on draft Twitter, basically, for pointing out things like, you know, it's unprecedented for a receiver to have a ton of success at the NFL level if they weigh less than 175 pounds, or if they are shorter than 5'8". But you're apparently just a nerd if you think that, and you need to get disconnected from your mom's internet in the basement and go outside, that sort of thing, even though you're just pointing out empirical facts. So I want to get things started with DeVonta Smith, a guy who, you know, Alabama Heisman Trophy winner, all that good stuff, 23 touchdowns this past season, completely dominant. Definitely didn't hurt that Jalen Waddle went out during the season, but nonetheless, he knew that the target was on his back all season long and was able to deliver dominant performance throughout this season. Was totally great in 2019 as well when they had Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs on top of that as well. But chose not to work out, at least at Alabama's first pro day. They have a second one coming up on the 30th, so that will be this upcoming Tuesday. But the big thing coming out of Alabama, coming out of Tuscaloosa, when it comes to Smith, is the fact that he checked in at 170 pounds. And the only workout or measurables that he was going to put down was verifying his weight for the scouts. So there was no 40, no bench, no vertical, broad jump, any number of tests. He wasn't doing them, at least that first time around. We don't know if he's going to do them on Tuesday either, but knowing what we know about him, we knew that he was skinny like that. I mean, he was listed at 175 during his last season at Alabama. So this isn't some sort of shocking revelation. The fact that he is checking in at what is empirically kind of a problematic weight for an NFL receiver and not putting any testing on top of it, like, what are your thoughts on him right now and these decisions and you know, what does this all mean when you're grading DeVonta Smith right now?
Well, I think it's a fair concern. I don't know if it's enough of a concern to write him off as a prospect. And for some of the people who raise that criticism, they're not even doing that. They're more so saying, I don't want to pick him in the first round of a rookie draft or whatever, or the first round of the real NFL draft. And I can understand it. I think there's enough obvious reason for concern there. It's like, you look at DeVonta Smith, he's built like a point guard. He's not built like a football player at any particular position. Even kickers tend to be, you know, fatter than that, at least, if they need to be. So you just don't really see a guy who looks like him on an actual football field, or an NFL football field anyway. So it's understanding, and I can imagine some people maybe remembering a receiver like Todd Pinkston or somebody like a previous skinny receiver who he wasn't very good. And I can imagine people saying like, oh, that's why he was sucked. He was too skinny. And I don't really think it was really that. And I think overall, DeVonta Smith was dominant enough that, assuming he doesn't test uniquely poorly, there's not so much a reason to write him off as much as there's just pause for ranking him behind, at least in my case, I rank him behind Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle, and I have all along. And I'm open to ranking him lower than that. Like, I know a lot of people are going to prefer like Rashad Bateman, I guess is the most popular in kind of like draft Twitter. And I personally would put Terrace Marshall ahead of Rashad Bateman. So Terrace Marshall would be my next bet to be the next receiver in line. I wouldn't. I don't know if I would recommend it at this point, but I definitely wouldn't argue against somebody putting Kyle Pitts, a tight end, ahead of DeVonta Smith in their draft order. So if the skinniness is something that someone says should not let Smith be in their top 5 for rookie rankings, that's a measured enough criticism. I get it. I'm not really gonna like argue with someone about that. But I think if someone specifically says that DeVonta Smith is going to go the way of a Paul Richardson or a D.D. Westbrook or whatever other skinny, not so great receiver they have in mind, I think that's a little bit too much of a reach. Like I think to say that specific level of condemnation is just as much of a reach as the DeVonta Smith super fans who are like, oh no, he's just he is simply the next Marvin Harrison. He will simply be Marvin Harrison, like the last outlier of that magnitude. So both of those are a little bit, I think, desperate of comparisons. I think it's more likely that DeVonta Smith is kind of just the first of his type. And we don't really know what that means, or at least I don't really have a super confident idea, but I think he's good. I just can't really tell. I'm definitely not open to the idea of ranking him ahead of Jamar Chase, which I know that Lance Zierlein ranked DeVonta Smith as his number 1 receiver this year, and some other people are going to as well that are, prominent NFL media, prominent NFL front office types. But Jamar Chase had a similar level of dominance at a younger age, at a frame nearly 40 pounds heavier. So for me, that's not a serious question. And I prefer Jalen Waddle because he's faster at about 10 pounds heavier and a couple inches shorter. So that's how I put it all into a picture, I guess. It's like a valid concern, but it's the kind of concern that just rules him out of the top overall receiver distinction. And I could see why someone would lower him as far as like 5, I guess. But any lower seems a little too aggressive to me.
Right. Yeah. I think you have that right, where it opens the door that he could slide back in your rankings a little bit, and it closes the door on him cracking the top 2. I think that it is pretty ironclad, like you were saying, with Jamar Chase, with Jalen Waddle, that at this point, that with how unprecedented a major success story from DeVonta Smith would be, given those physical measurables, I think it makes all the sense in the world to use that as a tiebreaker against him, put him at best 3rd in the pecking order. And then, like you said, you have a total unicorn in the other way in Kyle Pitts, where you don't really see guys as big as him move as fast as him. And there was some points out on Twitter today that, Kyle Trask kind of threw him closed a fair amount, so Pitts' last season could have been even crazier, really, all things considered. So, putting him inside your top 5.
I guess I would put Pitts ahead of DeVonta Smith at this point, and I could even see putting him ahead of like everybody. He just ran also like about a 4.5 flat or a high 4.4 or something like that. So that guy's gonna be really good, and I don't have a comp in mind exactly. All I really know is he's got to be at least the best tight end prospect since Jermaine Gresham, and it's also possible that he's the first of his type too. Like I don't really remember a player like him. So part of the reality too at receiver is that it's a really deep class, and the best dynasty picks are going to look a lot different after the draft than they do right now. Like particularly with guys like even Jamar Chase, but also DeVonta Smith. It's I guess not so much the Giants at this point. But if he just goes to a crap team or like a team with a bad quarterback, then we're not even really so fixated on the talent question anymore. We're just like, oh, he's kind of screwed. And you can make a case for a guy like AJ Brown, especially, that you should just always go for talent over situation, no matter what. But it's easier said than done, and good players have been held back by bad teams around them before. And if DeVonta Smith goes to the wrong team, then he'll be the wrong choice right now, and there's no way for us to know for sure. So there is no depth at tight end, on the other hand. So if you take Kyle Pitts, you're obviously passing on whatever those top receivers are, but you're also in a good spot to get, like, at the very least, like Amon-Ra St. Brown or like Rashad Bateman, maybe even Terrace Marshall in some leagues. Yeah. So there's no second. Especially no second high upside option, maybe Brevin Jordan, but I don't think even in his best case scenario he can compare to what Pitts is likely to be as a mid-range outcome.
No, I don't think so either. So I think you have that right as far as how you might want to approach your rookie drafts. in dynasty leagues, that sort of thing. Let's get on over to the other very notable receiver from this week. That, of course, would be Rondale Moore out of Purdue. And this is a tricky one. This one kind of stinks because, in a way, like Rondale Moore was like a total college football darling. Like his first game at Purdue, well, even before that, he was squatting 600 pounds, like setting Purdue weight room records as this little freshman. You're like, holy crap. All right, this guy's different. He comes out against Northwestern, torches them in the return game as a pass catcher, all that good stuff. And it carries on, memorably destroys Ohio State. That one of the most fun upsets I've seen in recent years. And he's like the big driving force behind it. So he totally captured the attention of at least one sliver of college football nation, I think, in his freshman season in 2018.
Oh, yeah,
and unfortunately, the rest of his career just didn't really go that well. And it wasn't really that he was a bad performer when he was on the field. It was just the question was that he wasn't on the field. Like, he was injured for most of his sophomore year. I think he only played at like 2 or 3 games. And then he played this year, but was also banged up once again. So then he comes out this week and everyone, again, because he's such a fun player to watch, it wasn't surprising that that his athletic testing was as dominant as it proved out to be. But to borrow a line from you, don't count it twice. Like this was what we were kind of expecting out of Rondale Moore as an athlete. Like, we knew that he had the potential to be that high 4.2, low 4.3 in the speed. We knew he could totally jump out of the gym. I mean, the 42-inch vertical, like I can't say that I was specifically expecting that, but I mean, I can't say that I'm surprised either. And if you're following along with some of his like training for his pro day, you saw him jumping over 40 inches earlier in this winter. So that again wasn't that shocking. But the questions still remain. One, he's not that durable, and there's no way to test that one way or the other. And then 2, he's small. And he's even smaller than we thought. I think that there is a sense around draft Twitter and everybody else that maybe Rondale Moore is like 5'9", maybe like a shade under.
That's what he was listed at, yeah.
But then the testing or the weigh-in happens, and lo and behold, he's not just like a hair under 5'8", like he's a real 5'7", like right at 5'7" flat, which again, similar in a different way, but similar to DeVonta Smith, where there's just not a lot of precedent of success stories of guys at that weight. So, I think that there's been a pushback, like, oh, if you're writing him off because he's too short, like you're just not thinking hard enough. Like he's a guy that you just get the ball in space and it works. When you start to like go with the get the ball in space argument for a guy, I already start to feel very suspect about the ground that you're standing on, because we've seen those cases time after time after time, the offensive weapon types time after time, and they often don't pan out. So again, I love Rondale Moore and I'm rooting for him, and I hope that he makes this video clip look pretty stupid. But man, I don't think that if you're an NFL team and you have, your job on the line and you're picking in the late 20s, taking that pick on a guy with basically Jakeem Grant, Andrew Hawkins as like best case scenario outcomes, at least as far as we know, that scares the hell out of me, man.
Yeah, Andrew Hawkins is a good call. I forgot about him. I guess he wasn't much of a prospect, is why he evaded my thinking. But yeah, it's only really those two, Jakeem Grant and Andrew Hawkins, and like Craig Yeast, and I don't know, might have been somebody else back at some point. I think Jakeem Grant was actually like 5'6" and 3/4 or something like that. And the good thing for Moore's prospects is that none of his comps are guys who were anywhere near as productive as him in college, and they didn't test as well. Like Jakeem Grant's probably the one who tested best out of that group, and he ran like a 4.37 kind of thing, something like that. So it's I think a lot like the DeVonta Smith thing for me, in that I totally get the concern. And in a class this deep, where you got guys in that similar range like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Rashad Bateman, I can't really fault anyone for going with them instead, especially when you consider it's not just that Rondale Moore is 5'7", it's that he wasn't really used downfield at all at Purdue. He was pretty much just playing underneath and outside. and there's a little bit in the middle of the field, in the backfield, all underneath. So he never really went downfield, and I feel like they've used David Bell downfield more than him, so it doesn't seem like it's entirely due to the structure of the offense. But for all we know, he could have had his route tree expanded in those games that he missed if he had played them, So it's a tough one for me to call when there's so much that could have happened in that time range that could have changed our opinion that didn't have a chance to happen. So I'm kind of agnostic on it, but I think that he's not really comparable to any of the worst case scenarios that we have in mind. Like Greg Dortch, I guess, is another one, but he doesn't really have that much in common with any of those guys aside from being under 5'8". And it's tough in cases like that because it's one thing to say it's unprecedented for a player of a certain type to succeed, and it's another to say there's a precedent for them to fail. And I think at the moment for both DeVonta Smith and Rondale Moore, it might be technically true to say it's unprecedented for a player like them to succeed, but it's also technically true to say it's unprecedented for either of them to fail because we just haven't seen the test, the case study yet. So for his freshman year, Rondale Moore was barely above baseline on that Purdue offense, but it's not something that I would hold against him the way I would normally hold.
Baseline.
Right, yeah, there wasn't really a second player, and the volume that he took up was so ridiculous that it definitely is the more pertinent detail to me. So running a 4.229 or whatever, having the 42-inch vertical, like you said, it's not grounds for raising him because if he had run a 4.35 and had like a 37-inch vertical, we'd be talking about him in like the second, third round turn instead of the top 40 or something. So all he did with that pro day is avoid, I think, the scenario of falling into the third round. But yeah, it's just really tough to know because I guess if he works out, he would look a little bit like Tyreek Hill or something like that. But even Tyreek is like 5'8". 185, something like, or that's what he was at his pro day anyway. And he's basically the fastest player of all time. So That's a pretty high bar to clear. And I know that technically Tyreek ran a similar 40 time, but it's one of those things to me. It's like, I'm guessing if he's not working at West Alabama or whatever he was at the time, maybe he's pushing for John Ross's number, something like that. Whereas obviously Rondale's been track fluent for a very long time. And had Purdue's facilities to work with. So I don't think he's likely to be as fast on the field as Tyreek. And even if he is, he's an inch shorter. So there's uncertainty as far as how you use him and what the theory of him is supposed to be. But in the meantime, a guy as athletic and hardworking as he must be and produce as early as he did, the way he did, it's tough for me to rule him out, and I wouldn't really take a side either way. If people are big fans of his, I can see why. If they're really skeptical, I don't quite share the skepticism, but I can't really tell anyone they're wrong for it exactly.
I'm more reluctantly skeptical, I think, because
that's fair.
I'm like a huge Rondale fan. Like I have been, since he got to Purdue, and I follow recruiting and everything. He was a really great pull out of the state of Kentucky, and had all these other offers, and it kind of surprised some people that he went to Purdue over some other spots. I think he had some Big 12 offers.
I guess Taylor Gabriel is another one he might be, but yeah, it's just all these guys that are like him never reached the heights that he did, So it's like maybe he's just going to be the first one.
Yes, I hope he is. And I hope that I don't know what his application is going to be at the NFL level, and because there isn't a good NFL offense that's going to feed him a 35% target share. I mean, basically no NFL offense leans on one guy that much, but whatever the pro equivalent would be.
Yeah, he might not be able to get more than like 800 snaps in a year just because he's not going to be the guy that they want blocking the 6'1", 210-pound outside corner. So on some run plays, he's only going to be out there for run plays if he's doing like jet sweep fakes. Like he's not going to be able to block he's not going to be able to block guys who are, 5 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier than him.
Okay, so we need the Matt Canada offense somewhere.
Yeah, you need slot reps probably.
Yeah. So again, that pares down his application, his snap volume a little bit. Again, I think that his best case scenario is absolutely, a total difference maker. A Tyreek Hill light, I think is a fine enough comparison. But yeah, again, I think that there's enough counting against him, be it the durability, be it the size, and other precedents to where I think it's totally fair to have some concerns. Yeah. Unfortunately. Let's get to a couple other pro days from around the nation. We've been Kylin Hill guys for a while. He had his workout, what was it, Wednesday.
Yesterday.
So he weighs in at 5'10", 214, so that nice dense frame, that the type of frame that you could see him, you could put 200, 250 carries on that without too much problem in the NFL. Goes out, runs in the low 4.5s, which I think is a great time for a guy with that type of build, and I think it lines up pretty well with his production, his yards per carry, that sort of thing during his time at Miss State. So good vertical jump, 36 inches, strong on the bench, 22 reps there. So everything looked good. I think that all things considered, you got to give 2 thumbs up to that workout. And once again, I don't know how long we have to keep saying it, but like Kylin Hill needs to be in your discussion as a top 5, maybe top 3 running back in this class.
Yeah. So in dynasty leagues and also redraft, I guess, we do have to keep draft capital in mind. As much as I would wish that I could just draft everybody precisely how I rank them personally, I do have to keep in mind that NFL teams might not be as high on Kylin Hill as I am. I don't even mean this as a slight to Javonte Williams or anything, but I don't see really good argument to say that Javonte Williams is better than Kylin Hill. I know they're different kind of players, so that makes it more difficult yet. But if I were to go on Twitter and say Kylin Hill is as good as Javonte Williams, I would probably get death threats or something. And it's just
there is a serious hype out there.
Yeah, the Javonte Williams hype is ridiculous. This one, he's better, I think, than David Montgomery, so I don't think it's going to look as ridiculous in hindsight. But it's the same people. I know it's the same people, and in a few cases, I know for sure that they're the same people. But it's so funny to me to watch this happen every year, where it's I'm just getting it in fights with the same people over this. Sometimes it's not even the same things, but it's always the same people, and it's pretty interesting. But I think Javonte Williams is in this category of prospect where it's he's a totally good day 2 pick. I don't really think much more about it. I think it's he's totally good. Not much reason to criticize, not much reason to get all worked up about it. He's a good day 2 pick. And that's how I feel about Kylin Hill. It's they're both good day 2 picks. And I really think that if Kylin Hill had a shot at that Miami defense last year, he could have put up 200 yards easy. It's no problem. It's that they quit. They didn't play. And Javonte Williams' numbers look a lot different if you just subtract that one game, and Michael Carter too, of course. So it just irritates me how so many people let their entire perspectives get dictated by these very just arbitrarily small samples. It's if you go into this year believing that Javonte Williams was a 1st-round pick, I respect that person much more than the people who didn't really have a belief about Javonte Williams going into the year and now are oh, he's the best prospect, he's running back 1. It's if he's running back 1, do you at least feel silly for not having the slightest scent of that going into this year, or probably in a lot of cases before that Miami game? There's so many people who slammed that verdict in when it was after the Miami game. It's that's a preseason game. It wasn't real. So I think that Kylin Hill is the victim of just kind of a lot of arbitrary optics kind of scouting, and then certainly just crowd herd just thinking. It's people these people that I'm talking about that I'm always disagreeing with, they always believe the same things as all these other people who read the same sites that they do. And you can tell that their beliefs, I know they believe what they're saying, but their beliefs aren't so much things that they came to as personal conclusions as much as it's just kind of clique behavior. And if their cool player of the month had been Kylin Hill, they'd all be hyping Kylin Hill, and they don't actually really think on their own. And I would say to those people, you should try to do that sometime. Try to just think for yourself. Because if you had looked at Kylin Hill's just objective work and looked at his tape, you wouldn't have been so surprised by his pro day. And now that we have these pro day numbers, there's no objective case against him. He's got a totally clean profile. It's a really good scout, prospect profile that he had. Now, I don't think he's going to be a star or anything. And it's a little difficult to figure out his exact comp, I think, but I would comp him mostly to Miles Sanders with the asterisk that he's a little slower and a lot more rugged. Miles Sanders is good. I'm not saying he's a fake running back or something, but he kind of plays like a flanker. He's not really he's not really just like a dog in traffic, Like Kylin Hill is just, fury on the field.
Is he what people wanted Keyshawn Vaughn to be?
So that one's tough to answer because I don't know what the hell anyone thought Keyshawn Vaughn was supposed to be. Like I thought he was fine.
Whatever is better than whatever the hell last year.
Yeah, I don't know what people thought with that one. Like, I just don't like. I never even got a little bit on what they were thinking. I was just confused the whole time. But if people want him to be the next Keyshawn Vaughn, as in like a guy who goes in the third round and might be pretty good, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, he's not really like Keyshawn Vaughn. No. He's a lot more of like joystick kind of movements, but with Kylin Hill, the cool thing about him is he moves like the joystick movement. And he's got 110% motor all the time, and he converts velocity to anchor and anchor into change of direction / velocity again seamlessly. He does that. That one thing is really important for running in traffic, and when you have a hot motor like him, that makes him, I think, actually a very high floor prospect. Like I'll be really surprised if Kylin Hill can't earn reps as a rookie. The question still is what they think of him as a character, because granted, I haven't listened to this Lance Zierlein or Dane Brugler podcast or whatever. Just someone on Twitter told me that they were saying like there's character concerns about him. And that was kind of what preceded his stock lowering in the online dynasty community. So if that was said, they heard it from people who are actually in college football and in the NFL. Now, I would say those people are pretty clearly Mike Leach, and they shouldn't be taken seriously. But there's a lot of people in the NFL and college football who think exactly the same as Mike Leach, more than who think the way I do about anything in particular. So Kylin Hill might suffer for his politics and for his beliefs and his courage, basically. So that is a possibility. Whereas, like, and anytime there's like a really talented player and who's a little bit of a, I don't know, like an individual, like a free spirit type, and then a second player who's just like a good soldier, the NFL is always going to take the good soldier type, and that could be held against Kylin Hill, and it could put as much as 2 rounds between him and Javonte Williams.
Hopefully that doesn't end up being the case. Hopefully, people come to their senses a little bit, and again with the workout, and I think Kylin Hill has good character. I mean, the stuff that he was fighting for
cool.
in Mississippi this summer was awesome.
Too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Read his interviews. He's clearly a smart guy.
Yep. So all the above with him, I think that he would be a very, very strong day 2 pick. And if he falls to day 3, then he's a huge value, a guy that people will sleep on initially, but then, the people that are smart and use their last couple best ball picks on him, they will see what the returns end up looking like. Let's get on over. We got one guy who is set to work out today. It's Jalen Darden, a little bit of an unknown. Obviously, he went to North Texas, so North Texas these days a little bit more known for basketball, having secured that upset victory last weekend. But on the football field, Jalen Darden was totally dominant this past season. The last 2 seasons were really strong, but this year he kind of took a whole other level. In 3 fewer games, he had 5 more targets than he did a year ago, so 118 targets, caught 19 touchdowns, which is preposterous, 74 catches, 1,190 yards, which comes out to 10.1 yards per target with a terrible quarterback situation, I might add. That North Texas was doing this ridiculous rotation between Jason Bean and Austin On. Both of them stink. Both of them are jokers.
Bad vibes on those names too. Man,
right?
You just know they're bad quarterbacks.
Yeah, Bean stinks. But yeah, not great. And even with all of that, he persevered and had crazy numbers. And, he had 12 touchdowns and 736 yards the previous season and a pretty high catch rate as well, 76 catches on 113 targets. So he's pretty automatic from the slot. I guess there's just going to be questions about the size. Is he, who was listed at 5'9", 174 during his time at North Texas. So I know that's small, and the 174, if we're bagging on DeVonta Smith, then why aren't we bagging on Jalen Darden so hard? Well, he's 3 inches shorter, so the density plays out a good bit differently there.
Came in at 5'7" and 3/4, it looks like. So
that's not great.
That's fine. He's 5'8", 174. And I'm just seeing these numbers now. He actually did a really good job. This is probably going to be a 4.5 at the combine, but 4.46. 122 broad jump, 6.663 cone, sub 4 20-yard shuttle. That's clean. That's a really clean profile, I think. So he is probably limited to the slot, but man, he incidentally is good friends with Kylin Hill, and he also is one of these hot motor guys. Like you watch him on the field, and you just know no one's going to put more effort into it. Like it's just not happening. It's not because anyone's lacking the will to. It's that it's guys like him just have an ability to tap into something that normal people can't. It's not an issue of wanting it. It's just that other people can't do it. And he's out there at 110% all the time. He's gonna break tackles. He's gonna make ankles twist. And with a profile like this, I really don't see an argument against him going as high as like the 3rd round. Whereas before, I was worried about him going drafted if he pulled a Tommy Schuler and ran like a 4.7 or something like that. But that's not what's happening here. He's got a really good profile.
Love that. So add Jalen Darden to your radar if he wasn't there already. A really prolific slot guy who stamped his testing pretty nicely. A couple other pro day numbers to get to before we move on to some free agent movement. Dwayne Eskridge is someone that we talked about early on in draft season. Haven't really talked about him much since because we talked about the case for him. Crazy productive during his time at Western Michigan. Had the amazing senior year, of course, but way advanced in his age and relatively small. 5'8.5", 190 is his size. So another guy who probably ends up in the slot. And I think that a lot of people expected a low 4.3, but he clocked in with a 4.38, which is great, of course, but it's a pro day, so that's probably closer to like a 4.42, 4.44, something like that. So that's not quite what the selling point was supposed to be for him. So I think that he stays probably in that 5th, 6th range.
Yeah, I don't know what the league is thinking about him exactly. For all I know, they still prefer him over Darden. I think that would be a mistake. But he also Eskridge might have also played more around like 180 or something. So maybe he came in 10 pounds heavier than he played at. Maybe in that tape we watched, he was running like a low 4.3, something like that. But it's 4.4 is different than a 4.33 or a 4.35. And in a deep class like this, it's not good to be 2.5 years older than the next player, who's the next oldest player, and merely fast. You got to be one of the fastest, which we don't have like objective reason to believe that at this point. So I agree. He probably belongs in the 5th, 6th, maybe the 4th round range. But if he goes higher, I'm not gonna like change my rankings over it. I worry about a guy like that. If some team reaches for him in like the late 2nd or the 3rd, I'm gonna ignore the draft capital because it's just clearly a bad pick.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good distinction to point out there. Couple other things to throw out. Penn State had their pro day today. No real notable skill guys, but a couple guys who might hear their names in the 1st round. You, of course, have heard of Micah Parsons, the linebacker, opted out this past season, but crazy good inside linebacking prospect, probably right on that same level as Devin White, in my opinion. Checks in with a sub 4.4 in the 40, a 4.39, 6'3", 246, so that ideal build, good numbers everywhere across the board. So Micah Parsons, I think, continued to cement that he's a top 10 talent in this class and LB1. And then Jason Oweh, someone who is kind of like almost Rashawn Gary-esque in the sense that there's no production to point
to.
But
way worse yet, even. Like, not that he's necessarily a bad player, but the production is worse. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Zero sacks in his last season. And he's an edge rusher.
Is he playing safety? I don't understand. Like, yes. That's bizarre. I think the comparison for Oweh, and I saw people saying like he's only been playing football for like 5 years, and I don't know how much I care about that. Like, wasn't Ezekiel Ansah only playing for like a couple of years when he came out, and like no one had any trouble understanding why he was good coming out of BYU,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting because Oweh is an insane athlete. Like, there's no doubt about that. He might be the first of his type, whatever threshold of weight to overall athleticism he's at. I think overall you'd have to compare him, though, to someone like Manny Lawson, who was the defensive end who played across from Mario Williams, at North Carolina State back 50 years ago or whatever. And Manny Lawson was a guy who didn't put up any production at North Carolina State. But he ran a 4.4 flat or something like that at like 6'6", 240. And I know Oweh is almost 20 pounds heavier, but 0 sacks kind of makes up the difference for me there. I don't know.
Yeah. So he's like, to me, like edge rusher Obi Melifonwu from a couple years ago,
That's a pretty
where
good
like
call.
he had like, he was the UConn guy who just completely ripped the combine apart, like just absolutely dominated. I don't know what was in the water at UConn there for a couple years. It was like him and like Byron Jones or something, but yeah, he had incredible workout metrics, zero football sense whatsoever. You watch the film and he's completely lost all the time, and lo and behold, terrible in the NFL. So less responsibility when you're an edge rusher. You got the prime directive of just going and get the quarterback. We'll see if they can tap into something there. But yeah, don't let the athleticism kind of like overshadow the fact that there's pretty damning evidence to the contrary that he's a slam dunk player by any means.
Yeah, if he goes in an appropriate range of the draft, then it's who cares really. He could be insanely good. Those kinds of tools are something to think twice about. Like even this is an extreme case and not the basis for which anyone should build their prospect process. But like Tyreek Hill was terrible in college. He was so bad in college. He was the second receiver on his own Western Alabama team or wherever the hell he played after he got kicked out of Oklahoma State and Akron. So he did literally nothing aside from play running back poorly for Oklahoma State off the bench for a year. So there's always extreme cases, and the outliers are more likely to be the guys who have athleticism like his. But there's also a healthier precedent than people might guess of insane athletes doing nothing at all in the NFL. It's like you can think of a guy like Margus Hunt or Moritz Boringer or whatever. Just there's a bunch of guys who did insane.
Taylor Mays.
Oh God, Taylor Mays. Yeah, that might be the best one yet. So yeah, there's a long history of freak athletes doing nothing at all in the NFL, and I would imagine doing nothing at all in college is a pretty reliable correlating detail for a lot of those.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of an eyebrow raise there, even though the workout numbers
Move
were
him to
really
receiver
strong.
or tight end or something. That'd
There
be
you
more
go.
interesting.
Yeah, figure it out.
Megatron, easy.
There it is. All right, let's move on over to the pro game. So obviously we have we hit most of the big free agent signings, at least in the early window a week ago. But there were a couple guys, as we noted, especially in that second episode of the free agent frenzy series. Everyone knows it. Everyone loves it. The receiver market was really, really cold, at least to get things rolling. Only a handful of big signings had occurred last time we talked. I mean, like Curtis Samuel was one of the biggest ones, and we love Curtis Samuel, of course, but like that shouldn't be like the total headliner of a free agent period at wide receiver. Kenny Golladay kind of shakes things up. There was, if you take the orange pill, you go to the Cincinnati Bengals for a 1-year prove-it deal, or you take the blue pill and you go to the Giants for 4 years and $70 million, which respect for signing the 4 year $70 million. But man, if you have Kenny Golladay on your dynasty team or whatever, doesn't feel great that he's tied to Daniel Jones now.
It's not great, but I haven't really been able to take a position on Golladay with the Giants yet because I don't know what the price is going to settle in at. And if people aren't exactly chasing him, I might be interested because if you must have a receiver with a trash quarterback, a big receiver like Golladay is harder to miss if you're an inaccurate quarterback. And as much as I think Daniel Jones is not good, he is willing to throw the ball. It's not like a cowardice issue with him. He just probably shouldn't have been drafted so high that a team forced him into a starting role. Like at the very least, he probably should have been like a developmental guy or something. So hopefully they could have made him a little more polished with his reads and his accuracy and his pocket instincts, things like that. But yeah, Daniel Jones was brutal last year. Playing hurt, I guess, is like a fair excuse. The problem for me is like I didn't even like his rookie year. A lot of people did. A lot of people looked at his rookie year and they saw the fantasy points and they were like, that's right. Fantasy points is quality in real life terms, 1-to-1. And it turned out to not quite be the case. For the first time ever, it turned out to not be the case. Huh. And it's one of those things like we have to remember we are asking the fantasy question, not the real life one. So if Daniel Jones is cheap enough and if Kenny Golladay are cheap enough, they might be able to be valuable in fantasy even if their real life production is kind of trashy. So it's something that I'm open to taking Kenny Golladay, and for his purposes, for his career purposes, it was totally the right call. I can't believe how much that contract was, because if Curtis Samuel's going for 11 million a year over 3 years, I am just flabbergasted that a team paid 72 million over four for Golladay, because I like Golladay, like he's a good player, but I'm not convinced that I would prefer him over Curtis Samuel for most offenses that I'm creating. Like some teams that I've built, maybe I want Kenny Golladay because I already got a Curtis Samuel or something like that. Fair enough, but and I guess to be fair to the Giants, like it made sense for them to make that contract offer. I'm just surprised that if anything, it seemed like nobody else was within like 20 million of their offer.
Bid
So
against
that was the
themselves a
weird
little
part.
bit. Yeah.
But yeah, props to Golladay. I mean, he went out there saying like, no, I want 18 million. And then there was just cold market for like 5 days or whatever. And you got all these reports saying like the Ravens are trying to get him for 8.5 million for 1 year. And the Bengals said,
The
well,
Ravens
how about this?
are biffing this, by the way. We'll get to that, but
yeah. So yeah, I mean, Golladay, he played poker better than any of the other, people in free agency so far. So good for him. I'm glad he got paid, and that's all he could really do to look out for himself. And for us in fantasy, maybe we hoped he would have gone to a better quarterback, but he made the right call for himself. So
my Austin Mack shares have gone up in smoke.
Austin Mack. Yeah, that's. I mean, I like that offense they have. They're gonna have to get rid of Evan Ingram. I think that's pretty much obvious by now. They can't keep him because they signed Kyle Rudolph too. And to justify that Kenny Golladay contract, you got to take those Ingram targets and give them to Kenny Golladay. So replacing Ingram was obvious enough, I think, when they signed Golladay, and then signing Rudolph, a guy who doesn't draw targets. It's like, come on, they're gonna trade Ingram for like a 5th-round pick, and it's because everybody knows they have to trade him now. But yeah, I like the overall theory of it. Even so, it's like Golladay. He never drew targets more than like one every. What would it be like? I don't know. He was not a guy who drew a ton of targets per snap because he had a long A dot depth of target. And maybe they lower his depth of target to give him more intermediate functions than the Lions did. But I think Darius Slayton's still good, and I think Sterling Shepard's great in the slot. So I'm not really convinced Golladay goes over like 130 targets. So I might need him to fall into something like the 6th round or something like that. And I don't know if he will, but if he does, I'm pretty much open to it. I think he's a good player, and if they need garbage time to get those numbers up, I think they'll do it more or less.
Yeah, they will have plenty of garbage time in the Meadowlands this year, no matter who the home team is. But yeah, Giants also definitely going to have that. Let's go Will Fuller, 1-year deal down in Miami. Interesting. The Houston-Miami linkage continues. But what are your thoughts on this signing, adding him to Tua? Do you like Tua a little bit more now because he has like a obvious downfield speed threat? Do you like this less for Fuller? I mean, obviously there's a drop off from Deshaun Watson to Tua, even if Tua takes a big next step. But are you concerned enough about the sample from Tua last year to where this maybe scares you off of Fuller a little bit in redraft?
I don't think it'll scare me off on the Tua grounds. It's just going to come down to the price, I guess. And Fuller might get a bit of a discount since people know, or at least right now, are assuming he won't be playing with Deshaun Watson, who, as much as I think Will Fuller is great, and I do think he's really good, and I think the people who still doubt him are just basically petty, weirdos.
Yep.
He worked perfectly with Deshaun Watson. So there's a pretty good chance there is not a second quarterback who works as well with Will Fuller in the entire league. And Tua might be down there at like 25 for all we know. But Tua made a lot of downfield throws at Alabama, and he didn't really have that option last year. So as much as I wasn't really on Tua as a prospect, I find his harshest critics to be pretty hyperbolic and just borderline like superstitious. Like the thing, like saying he got benched for Fitzpatrick 2 or 3 times means that he's bad. It's like, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that they were trying to go to they put into a knowing he was worse than Fitzpatrick because they wanted to develop him with the experience. And then they were in some games where they were like, oh, we're in it in the 4th quarter. maybe we should try to win it with Fitzpatrick because Tua, we didn't even think was going to win games like this. We didn't expect to be at this point in the fourth quarter where we could win. So they
Right.
went back to him.
They were in the playoff hunt. Like it made
Yeah.
sense to go to Fitzpatrick in that Raiders game, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So like I was not a Tua fan as a prospect. I just declined to really give a take on him. But the critics, and I think his critics are a little louder than his supporters at this point.
Yep.
I don't think they make good cases at all. I think they make really consistently awful arguments, actually. So I think Fuller's good, even if he's not going to be nearly as good with another quarterback. I still think Will Fuller changes the complexion of the field, and Devontae Parker is going to get a little bit more room to work. Maybe Lynn Bowden can get going. Gesicki probably gets less safety attention now. So, especially if they improve that offensive line a little bit, I actually expect Tua to take a pretty drastic step forward this year.
I would like to see that, and again, that would make the Miami defense or the Miami offense actually dangerous. I thought that there was kind of some smoke and mirrors going on with them last year, and now they got some legit speed to go opposite Devontae Parker, and that this could turn out pretty nicely for them. I like the trajectory of the Dolphins right now, especially if Tua can take that proverbial year two step like you mentioned. Let's get to a couple running back developments from around the league. Starting things off, I guess from a fantasy perspective, this one might be the most interesting. Damien Williams to Chicago, because this means things for both Damien and, of course, David Montgomery, who I think everyone is kind of quick to be like, okay, we realize that he was like the AMC GameStop like pump and dump thing where it's like, yeah, he crushed it the last 5 games of the season because he had a super easy schedule, and the Bears were giving him literally all the backfield touches because Cohen was out, blah, blah, blah. So it all like helped pump up Montgomery's value, but in reality, it didn't actually exist. And so now we see a situation where he's at risk of losing some snaps, some touches to a more explosive player who has experience in the Matt Nagy offense. But then you also have Tariq Cohen still there in the fold. So this Bears backfield goes from being like very stratified, like it's the Montgomery show, and even though it's not pretty, he's going to get you the production, to now I don't really know if I'm touching this one with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, it's not where I was hoping Damien would go. I think he can play well in some systems, but I don't know if the Bears are it. Like I'm assuming Damien basically has poor vision or something like that because he's always been densely built and fast and a good pass catcher. And he never really got going until Kansas City, where he might not see the field well, but what is there to see other than open space? It's an easy situation for a running back, and if you're as fast as him, you can capitalize. So if there's space, I think he'll generally capitalize, but I don't expect there to be space at all, really. So I don't really expect much from Damien. I don't think he can challenge Montgomery exactly, but maybe he can. I don't know. I'm still not exactly high on Montgomery. I think he's pretty clearly the definition of average or more or less. I do think they're going to move Tariq Cohen, though. I guess I don't have any particular evidence of that, but I just don't know that they really have room for him in that offense because the Nagy offense can make room for a Tyreek Hill, but that's not what Tariq Cohen is. He's like a Tyreek Hill that's in the backfield for some reason, and he can't really do much. Like he can return punts a lot, and he can fumble a lot. I think Tariq Cohen could be good on a different team, but it's not happening there. He really has been having a rough go of it in that Bears offense. So I wouldn't be surprised if they move him for not really that much, and kind of just go with Damien Williams as the second running back instead. But we'll see. I'm not planning to invest in any of them really, so I don't really know if I'll follow up on this one.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. So this suddenly becomes just a weird backfield situation there in Chicago. Tevin Coleman going to the Jets. Someone, I think it was Scott Fish, had a good line on Twitter where he basically said the Jets have been hanging out with zero RB Twitter too much.
Or I guess Kyle Shanahan. I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough one for me to figure out because I'm biased. I think Tevin Coleman can actually be pretty good, but he's been getting hurt quite a lot at this point, and I don't even know if we know for sure that he's a similar kind of athlete as he used to be when he was so good at Indiana. And he was good in his first couple of years too for the Falcons. Like he was the starter over Devontae Freeman his rookie year coming out of training camp, going into week one, and then he got a high ankle sprain. And then Devontae Freeman was the running back one that year, or whatever it was. Like he was a top three running back or whatever. And then Tevin never really got back in the starting lineup there. And then he went to the 49ers, and he had that big Cardinals game where he had 4 touchdowns, and then he's got a bunch of high ankle sprains again. So that's just kind of how he is. He kind of just gets his ankles caught in the teeth of the defense. And I don't know if it could both be wearing on him physically, and it could be kind of messing with his mental timing of things. Like it's one thing if you're, in Indiana era Tevin Coleman out there, but now it's like you're Tevin Coleman in 2021 who remembers that he's had like 4 high ankle sprains, and it probably makes you think when you're running, what is that guy going to hit my ankle? Like things like that. Just like a little flicker of awareness of where your ankle is. Whereas in the past, maybe he was only just, seeing red, and he's got the horse blinders on and he's just charging at the end zone. Like, I don't know if he's the same guy. So we'll see. I think he has the talent, at least coming out of college he did, but I don't know if it's realistic to expect a whole lot from him, even if his health is granted, which we probably can't assume. But those other running backs are terrible.
They are terrible. So there is that. But I think this also just doesn't close the door on the Jets going after a running back.
Maybe it doesn't affect anything for the draft. No.
So I think that
it might make more certain that they do draft one.
Yeah, I think that's probably the actual good takeaway to have when it comes to Coleman to the Jets. I want to get to one more guy at the running back position. Mike Davis, obviously admirably filled in for Christian McCaffrey a lot last season. I would say that his fantasy investors, the guy that scooped him on the waiver wire or used him as their replacement for Christian McCaffrey, were overall pretty pleased with the returns. Like all things considered, getting a guy like that who, had washed out at a couple different spots comes in and gives you viable RB2 production for a lot of the season. Good on him. And the Falcons, of course, the Gurley situation, the Gurley experiment didn't really work out. And of course, guys like Brian Hill, Ito Smith, they're not it. So I think Mike Davis made some sense, but I think it's a cousin to the Tevin Coleman signing, where I think the Falcons could also attack running back in the draft too.
Yeah, so Mike Davis is kind of funny because he's another one of these cases where people are struggling to separate fantasy production from real life value, because he wasn't good last year. He got a lot of catches and he got a lot of usage, which was good for fantasy, and he was a boon to pretty much everybody that had him last year. But he wasn't good. He wasn't more productive than even like Rodney Smith was. So he, if he ends up in the same scenario with Atlanta where he's getting all this usage, then yeah, he's going to be really good for fantasy, just because not many running backs get 4 or 5 catches a game every week and 20 carries or upwards of 20 carries anyway. So we know that offense is going to run a bunch. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like though. They might look a lot like the Tennessee offense in that they use a lot of 2 and 3 tight ends, but they're not going to have a Derrick Henry. They're not going to have necessarily, I still think they want Fields or Lance. I don't think they want Zach Wilson. But absent that, Matt Ryan is not a Ryan Tannehill or Marcus Mariota. They obviously have they have Julio, but it's just a different offense. It's like the Titans didn't have the Ridley either. It's like the second pass catcher was Corey Davis. So there's a lot that has to change there, and I don't know if it's going to be like we have a 25 carry running back every week offense. It might look quite a bit different than it did in Tennessee, and I don't know which sort of approach would even be better for Davis. I guess we want pass attempts so he can get targets like he did in Carolina last year, but I think that he's pretty easily matched by a lot of rookies. It is a shallow class though, so I guess it's like they're not signing anyone else. So maybe Davis is kind of worth reaching for in drafts, but I'm kind of terrified to see what his price tag is looking like these days. I haven't pulled up any drafts yet, but I can imagine people taking him as high as like the 5th round, and that doesn't sound right, because like even if they only draft like a Ramondre Stevenson or something, it's like that's enough for me to put Davis back in like the 8th or 9th round,
Yeah, exactly. So definitely don't overspend on Mike Davis. There's probably another shoe that's going to drop it in Atlanta. So yeah, it won't be quite the same. I think that he could still maybe end up being flex viable for fantasy purposes, but
Yeah,
like
he
you said,
should be. He should be. Unless they get like ETN or Harris, he should be flex viable.
yeah, but
Just remains to
that
be seen whether he's a flex price or if he's like a running back 20 price or something like that.
exactly. So keep that perspective in mind. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. We, of course, will be back next week with more pro day stuff, more free agent stuff as we get closer and closer to the upcoming NFL draft. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.